Guys, so I'm here to do a wrap-up for July. I read or finished 11 books this month, which for me is actually quite a lot. I mentioned a few times that I just tend to read a bit more slowly, although I'm working on that, and I'm going to talk about that at the end when I talk about the book that I'm currently working on. Yeah, so I read 11 books, and I'm just going to get started. First was Lakota Woman by Mary Crowdog and Richard Erdoes. This, I think, covers some really important subject matter that I think a lot of Americans aren't acquainted with. I certainly didn't know about the events of this book, so Mary Crowdog is one of the most important leaders of the American Indian movement, so it's a civil rights movement for Native Americans, which actually took place around the same time as the Black civil rights movement. She talks about two particular events where they occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington. The American Indian movement did these things, and then they also occupied the site of the massacre of Wounded Knee, and also talks about a bit about their kind of reclaiming of their Native American religion, their heritage, and things like that. So yeah, I think this is an important book. It wasn't always, it's not always the most well-written one. Overall, it is well-written, but like there are times where you kind of, have to kind of plug your nose over the turn of phrase or something like that. Next book I read was this tiny little thing. It's Toni Morrison's Nobel Lecture. And this, you can listen to this on YouTube. It's on YouTube. If I remember, I'll just link it down below for anyone who's curious. But it's great to hear Toni Morrison actually say this. But it's beautifully written. It's about how language can be used to oppress groups of people, but also just be used by totalitarian governments, but also how language can be used to liberate groups of people and help us understand other people, and yeah, I just thought it was beautifully written, very important message, I think. So yeah, both of those books will be keeping proud spots on my bookshelf. Next was a book that I think I actually started in maybe March, maybe April, maybe even before that, maybe I may have started this book last year, I'm not sure, but it's Harper's Anthology of 20th Century Native American Poetry. So this was published back in the 80s, I believe. I think it was back in the 80s where this anthology was published, but it is what it says it is. 1988 is when this is from. So, a bit out of date, but it has a lot of the writers who were prominent in the Native American Renaissance. And the Native American Renaissance is something that Dwayne Neatom is the editor. And he talks about the Native American Renaissance in the introduction. And it's this blossoming of Native American literature and culture in the later parts of the 20th century, when Native American writers and artists, and just artists defined broadly, singers, etc., started to kind of break through and become a part of the mainstream. But yeah, this was a hit or miss anthology, but it also kind of hit me while I was doing my bookshelf tour that for any anthology that is for an anthology of Chinese poetry, or an anthology of Japanese poetry, or an anthology even just of American poetry, it's bound to be hit or miss, because you're putting together all the poetry of a country or a group of people, and you're bound not every poet from them is going to be for you. So yeah, this was hit or miss, but I don't consider that a criticism, because I found some poets that I really love and who I want to read more of their work, like Joy Harjo, who I've talked about a fair amount, I think. Yeah, so there's that. Next is An Introduction to Shakespeare by Marcia Shute, and this was sort of a disappointment. I was hoping for kind of more analysis of Shakespeare's plays, and a lot of it was just kind of Shakespeare's life and times and how they ran a play, and why plays were getting so popular at the time. So it wasn't quite what I was looking for, but Lillian Neiswender. I don't know if I'm saying your name right. I'm sorry. Um, she left a comment. She's one of those commenters who doesn't have videos. She said that the best book she's found on Shakespeare is Shakespeare: The Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom. So I think I'm gonna order that pretty soon. Maybe when I get back from the Czech Republic, I will place an order for it at thriftbooks.com. But also, just yesterday, Jess at Garden Scriptorium did a video where at the end she talked about how she's teaching Shakespeare, and she said a bunch of things about Shakespeare. Kind of her town is doing, like, her town started this production project years and years ago where they are doing a production of every single one of Shakespeare's plays. But that sort of motivated me to think about reading more of Shakespeare's work, because I've only read 4 of his plays, and the used bookstore here in the town I live in last time I was there, they had several volumes that were Shakespeare. I can't remember everything they had, but they had a lot of the big ones: Othello, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet. I think maybe Richard II, maybe Twelfth Night, and As You Like It. They have a lot of Shakespeare plays, so I think maybe today or sometime this week I might just go grab a bunch of cash and go buy a bunch of Shakespeare books, and then order Harold Bloom's book, and then kind of do a read along where I read a play and then I read what Bloom has to say about it, and then I make a video or something like that. If anyone is particularly interested in that, tell me. I'm not particularly qualified to talk about Shakespeare, but I would like to just give my personal impressions on my reading of Shakespeare. So that might be happening. I don't know. I also want to read more nonfiction in the fall, so there'll be a bit of a conflict there between that and my reading more nonfiction. But I might anyway. Moving on. Next, it was The History of Alexander by Quintus Curtius Rufus. Has it become apparent that I really love saying the name Quintus Curtius Rufus? This is mainly about the campaigns of Alexander from when he leaves Greece to invade Persia and defeat the Persian king Darius. Yeah, and it's great fun. You kind of learn a lot about how people wanted to think about Alexander, about his personality, and that's really interesting. I really liked it. I might eventually write a novel based on it, just for kicks. So anyway, I like that. Next was yet another memoir by a Native American, and it was You Don't Have to Say You Love Me by Sherman Alexie. Sorry about the glare. These light book covers are not agreeing with the window open. But this is a memoir about a lot of things, but Dust Jacket makes it clear that it is mainly about his relationship with his mother, which is very complicated, dysfunctional, but fascinating. And I did record a video about it that I'm going to be posting probably next week. Yeah, but I did like this. And it also has poems in it, which was interesting. It's interesting to see the prose chapters interspersed with the poems. I liked it. So there's that. Next is another book by a Native American, The Way to Rainy Mountain by N. Scott Momaday. So this is sort of an account of the mythology of the Kiowa Indians, and sort of how those myths related to the Kiowa in real life. And I think it's a really important book. I kind of wish there was a book like this for every Native American nation, because I think this sort of thing is just so important. It's sort of about the preservation of their oral tradition, and it's been part of their way of life. But yeah, I really loved it, and I think it's an important book. Yeah. The only criticism I might draw is I wish it were a bit more substantial. It's tiny, and also a lot of the pages are like that. So you can read it in one sitting. But yeah. Next is what I just recently finished and recorded a video about, which is A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. I really like this. I'm posting a video. Whoop. Okay, there's a cat. I'm posting a video about it. But I'm gonna talk less about the contents of the book and more about what the contents have to say about science as a process. And I'm really excited for that. That's sort of that's something I'm very passionate about as someone who's studying to become a scientist. So I'm excited for that video to go up. And there are a couple books that I read as ebooks or audiobooks. So I finished this summer reading all of the surviving plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles. So I had already read the Oresteia by Aeschylus, and I'd already read the Oedipus trilogy by Sophocles. And so I read by Aeschylus, Prometheus Bound, The Persians, The Suppliants, Seven Against Thebes. And I liked all of them except maybe The Suppliants, which was kind of boring, I thought. But I loved reading The Persians first and then reading The Seven Against Thebes, because it seems to me that the main characters of those two plays are kind of contrasting. Like, so The Persians is about Xerxes, the king of Persia, who sends an army off to invade Greece, and it gets crushed. And so the whole play is kind of about his hubris in doing that. And Seven Against Thebes is about Oedipus Rex's son, Eteocles, who's sort of in charge of Thebes, but his brother, Oedipus's other son, is kind of coming to take it back. Sorry. And it's sort of about how sometimes bad luck can also just lead to a downfall. So it was interesting to look at that contrast of the hubris and the poor choices leading to a downfall, and the just bad luck. Because Eteocles kind of makes it clear that he doesn't believe in fate, sort of. So that was interesting to see that contrast. And and I also watched a production of the Oresteia on YouTube. And I'll link it down below because it is great. They have musical accompaniment. The translation is very beautiful English. The people speak the lines in rhythm and sometimes even sing them. And they also wear masks, which I really liked. I thought that was really cool. I thought all these extra things sort of really brought out the drama of that trilogy. And because when I first read the Oresteia, I was kind of like, okay, I mean, I don't know, I was just a bit underwhelmed, sort of, which may have been because I read them too fast, or it may just, I don't know, but this production really made me feel this trilogy. And also they do something kind of weird where they like in ancient Greece, they have an all men cast. So even Clytemnestra is played by a man, but that actor who plays Clytemnestra is such a knockout performance. He really steals the show. He's amazing. I just wanted him on stage the whole time. And the actor who plays Orestes is also fabulous, though not quite as good as the one who plays Clytemnestra, in my opinion. And then by Sophocles, I read Ajax, Philoctetes, Electra, and the Trojan Women. I really liked Ajax and the Trojan Women. Trojan Women was this sort of a tragic story where the wife of Hercules, Daenerys, unintentionally brings about his death, and just kind of the consequences of that. And I mean, it's relatable. I mean, like, it's doing something that you didn't know would cause a tragedy, and reacting to it. And then Ajax is about Ajax, who was this warrior in the Trojan War, and in the Trojan War, after Achilles is killed, his armor needs to be given to another warrior, and Ajax thinks it should go to him because he thinks he's the greatest warrior, and he also thinks that Achilles would have wanted him to inherit it, but King Agamemnon awards it instead to Odysseus, and Ajax gets kind of mad about that, and means to kind of go on a rampage against Odysseus, but I think it's either Athena or Apollo who kind of curses him, and instead of going off and fighting Odysseus and other men, he ends up killing a bunch of just cattle, and in his regret over that, he ends up killing himself, and yeah, I really like the portrayal of how Ajax's loved ones, his wife and his son, reacted to his suicide. So then I listened to an audiobook, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is his memoir about growing up in South Africa. He was half black, half white. His mother was black, his father was white, and at the time he was born, that was a crime. So he's literally born in crime. And I liked it. I didn't find it that funny, I guess, but I also have an awful sense of humor, so that might not really say much. I liked learning more about apartheid, which is something I didn't know much about. It was entertaining. I mean, it reminded me, in the fact that they grew up kind of dirt poor, and as blacks in South Africa, it did remind me a bit in terms of that sort of poverty growing up, things like that, kind of desperate for money and food and things like that. It reminded me a bit of Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt, but it wasn't nearly as well written as that, but, I mean, not that it was poorly written, but, you know. Brian at Brian's Book Bastion actually made this point and brought it to my attention that his mother, Trevor Noah's mother, really is kind of a really fascinating character. I did enjoy that. What do we have next? Okay. So, next I have a book that I was going to read, but I don't think I'm going to read now, because I started it and, wasn't crazy. And, it's, The Greek Myths by Robert Graves. I did a bit of research about kind of because there's two parts of this. There's the actual narrative of the myths, and there's his sort of take on the myths. And he does these sort of social, historical analysis of them and what they say about sort of the history of people in Greece. And online I kind of read that his scholarship is very questionable, and probably not really, very good. And also kind of, I found that part very boring. And I think there are other books about mythology like this one. There's I think just called Mythology by Edith Hamilton, which I had a copy of, but I unfortunately donated that one in lieu of keeping this one. But maybe I'll go and buy it back from the used bookstore and then read that one. I don't know. But yeah. And then finally, the book I am currently reading. Hold on, I have a cat. A book I'm currently reading and also kind of running an experiment on, and it is Look Homeward, Angel by Thomas Wolfe. So this is obviously a very long, it's about 500 pages long. It's about Eugene Gant and his family and his kind of coming of age, and it ends, I know, when he's 19 and begins when he's born. Well, no, it doesn't begin it begins before he's born and ends when he's 19. It's just about him growing up in the small town in the South in North Carolina. I'm really liking it so far. It's beautifully written, very kind of luxuriant, maybe a bit self-indulgent prose, yeah, and at times kind of using a bit of a stream of consciousness-y style of writing, a bit like Virginia Woolf more like the Virginia Woolf kind of stream of consciousness than the James Joyce stream of consciousness. So yeah, I am liking this, and I'm also kind of running an experiment on it, because when I did my my slow read tag video, I talked about a couple of books like Housekeeping, where I thought it would be good to read them slowly, because of just the language, the beautiful language, and just enjoying that. And I sort of, as an experiment, because I saw right from the get-go that this book was beautifully written, I decided to try something else. So Conrad from 7 Days at Sea left a comment on that video, a really interesting, really thought-provoking comment, where he kind of questioned this idea that, you know, beautiful sentences are enjoyed more slowly than they are quickly. And I was, maybe, that wasn't the only thing he said, but that's the main thing that I'm basing my experiment off of. And I don't know if I was entirely convinced at the time that you could enjoy kind of beautiful writing at a fast pace, but I've been trying to read this faster. I've been trying to train myself to not read the words out in my head, but to let my eyes do the reading, kind of. And so I've been trying to read about 100 pages a day, which for me is quite a bit, especially since this is not exactly dense, but not light and not gripping. There's not much of a plot, and I'm finding that you know, I'm enjoying this book just as much if I read it slowly, I think. Yeah, so I'm starting to come around to Conrad's view of reading, and that's interesting. And I think it's good, because I've been thinking I really need to kind of train myself to read more, especially as I go into the school year, so that I can maintain this channel, and keep posting videos about books that I've actually read. So yeah, that is everything. I'm sorry this has gone on so long, but yeah, that was July. So thank you for watching, guys. Goodbye.